Hey guys, this is Winter and I'm just here to break down how I made my part in Sinister Sensations, and I'll be giving some tips and tricks that you can use that I picked up along the way. So when I just started the part, I just had a raw layout and I didn't really know what to do with it. So I first made a plan, which you can see here, which just consisted of basic lines to show where my structures and my ground were going to be. And I made a pretty decent sketch of what the part was going to look like in the end, reflected onto the final part. So now about the actual deco. This is probably my first part that I separated the parallax layers like this, you can see, with each layer having their own different height. Makes it really easy to tell where you're actually looking. If I turn this opacity off here, you can see that the foreground extends way past the end of my part, which I find much easier because you can just go in and make changes instead of having to fiddle around with layers. Another small thing that I did here is that in some of my structures I added like slight shading, you can see here, and behind these generators and stuff, and also from the orbs, which just helps tie the lighting and the atmosphere in better. You can see a bit of the reflecting light from the blue orb goes off here, and off the red orbs as well, especially in this cave part. I'm pretty happy with the cave part. Anyways, another very important thing I learned from this part is that making assets is really important. It helps you optimize your structures, and you can just copy paste them around and it doesn't look quite bad if you make a few variations of the assets. You can see here I also made the spike assets and these random things and some bricks, which I thoroughly reused over the whole part, even in the background and the foreground. So another thing that I did was I used really basic textures here because this is a pretty fast part and I think it works pretty well. These textures are just completely consisted of these objects with some of these 3D objects in them, along with squiggly lines just to polish it a bit more, and some of these texture thingies. On these concrete pillars here, if I can find the layer, it's literally just these same objects again, just scaled and warped a bit. With these, it's just done with these little metallic objects which I copy pasted around. With these textures here, I just used the same thing. I used some of these bricks and some cracks along with these things to make the concrete textures. For effects, I added some explosions which you can see go off here in the editor. Basically all I did was I just had a massive explosion that was all on one group, and I just made it all become visible when you want the explosion to go off, and I think it turned out pretty well. I wanted a really big explosion, so I even had a gradient on the side to go off, because that just helps tie in the explosion more. Also, for the dust and the sand particles, I just used a few particle triggers with some fast moving stuff, and this one with the fog in the foreground. Just all tied together with a UI trigger, which I really find helpful. And it makes a noticeable difference in the atmosphere. And lastly, for the pulses and the shakes, I just laid them down on the drum beat. They are pretty subtle, but I think it's just a nice touch. This was a pretty enjoyable part to make, and it's probably my best part as of now, so I hope you enjoyed this short little walkthrough, and hopefully I make a new part soon.